Hello, magandang gabi at Hump Day Wednesday po muna tayo sa ating episode ngayong linggo. Hello sa viewers natin, hindi lang dito sa Pilipinas, kundi maging sa buong mundo. Welcome sa isa na namang episode ng ang show na walang title pero hashtag sa atin ang eleksyon dahil we advocate for safe, accountable, transparent, and inclusive elections which inspire national public confidence. Ako po si Paul Soriano, isang mamamahayag, press freedom advocate, at syempre ay advocate din ng isang tapat at malinis na halalan. Nitong nakaraang buwan lamang po ay inaprubahan ng House of Representatives sa pangatlo at huling reading ang House Bill 7352 na naglalayong i-operationalize ang Constitutional Convention o ang pag-a-amiyenda ng ating 1987 Constitution. Samantala sa Senado, tinutulak ngayon ni Senator Robin Padilla ang pag-amiyenda ng mga economic provisions ng ating Constitution upang di umano'y maisulong ang higit pa na pagpapaunlad sa ating bansa. Sa dami ng beses ng sinubukan na amyendahan ang Konstitusyon, marami sa atin ngayon ang naguguluhan pa rin. Ano nga ba ito at paano ito maaaring mangyari? Ano nga ba ang mga epekto nito kapag nabago ang ating Constitution? Nasa tamang panahon na nga ba tayo para isulong ang ganitong mga inisyatiba? Marami tayong tanong sa episode na ito pero sigurado rin tayo na masasagot at mabibigyang linaw ito ng ating panauhin ngayong gabi. Hindi ko na po patatagalin pa, we introduce our guest. He is the founder and chairman of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections. He's a former COMELEC Chairman and one of the framers of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Makakasama po natin ngayong gabi si Attorney Christian S. Monsod. At habang hinihintay po natin si Attorney Monsod, we also want to invite our audience to join the discussion by sending messages to our hotlines flashed on your screens and by using the hashtag sa atin ang eleksyon. Nariyan din po ang ating Lente hotlines. For Globe, you may reach 0917-106-6265 and for smart subscribers 0920-266-0944. We're also live on Lente Philippines Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube accounts and in our partners' Facebook accounts and pages. Do not forget to like and share our episode tonight and use the hashtag sa atin ang eleksyon. Magsisimula po tayo sa ilang sandali lamang sa ating pong talakayan at habang hinihintay po natin ang ating panauhin, as early as now, kung meron kayong questions about charter change, sigurado naman tayo na hindi ito ang unang dinig natin no, doon sa ating sa isyong ito no, sa usapin ng Chacha. Yan. At sa gabi pong ito ay mas bibigyang linaw natin ang ating ang isyong ito. Alright, at habang hinihintay po natin, syempre excited din po ang kami dito sa Lente na ipakita sa ating manonood at mga taga-subaybay ang ating bagong segment, ang isa sa ating mga pinakabagong segment. At ito po ang mula sa tinig ng masa. Malapit na ang barangay at SK elections at focus muna tayo sa SK election at tanungin natin no, kung ano nga ba ang tingin ng ating mga kababayan tungkol dito. Let's ask.
Magandang umaga mga ka-LENTE. Nandito muli tayo mula sa tinig ng masa. This October 2023 ay magkakaroon muli ng barangay and SK election. Pero sa episode natin ngayong umaga, magpo-focus muna tayo sa SK. Ano nga ba ang masasabi ng ating masa tungkol dito? Magtanong, mag-usisa, kaya in other words, let's ask. Hello, ano nga po pala yung pangalan ninyo?
Rudolph Casimiro po. James Matthew Bernan po.
Rudolph at James. So ayun po, nagtatanong po kami, para po sa inyo, mahalaga po ba yung SK?
Opo, kasi po madami pong batang sasali sa may palaro nila, tapos magiging masaya po.
Magiging, so kayo po?
Opo, kasi sila po yung namimigay at ng barangay po.
So ayun, maraming salamat Rudolph and ayun, magandang hello po sa inyo. Pwede po bang malaman po yung pangalan ninyo?
Rika po. Rika.
Kurt. Opo.
Kurt at Rika. So ayun nga po, yung tanong po namin is, para po sa inyo, mahalaga po ba yung asking?
Opo, kasi sila po yung gumagawa ng mga activities sa barangay na para sa mga youth at gabay na din po yun para yung mga tao may libangan tulad ng pagbabasketball, sila po yung nagmamanage nun.
Ayun. Babo ko yung may dadagdag po kayo. Wala naman. Ayan, hello po. Pwede po bang matanong yung pangalan nila?
Lala po.
Lala?
Yes.
Lala po, Lala. Okay, so Lala, curious kami. Dahil po, papalapit na yung barangay na SK election. Sa tingin niyo po, mahalaga po ba yung SK?
SK kasi hindi ko siya masyado nararamdaman kasi parang wala naman masyadong naanohan sa akin ngayon. So parang ngayon wala pa ako masyadong alam kaya hindi ko pa masyado malaman kung ano ba talaga yung ng SK. Kaya hindi ko sure kung kailangan ba siya o hindi. So hindi ko mamalaman kasi parang hindi ko pa talaga ramdam yung ngayon yung mga SK ngayon. Kaya hindi ko sure.
Thank you so much for watching mula sa Tinig ng Masa. Abangan ang next episodes at laging kakatandaan sa atin ang eleksyon.
Alright, at magpapatuloy po tayo dito sa ating talakayan. We welcome our guest, one of the framers of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Good evening and welcome to the program, Attorney Christian S. Monsod. Good evening po, Attorney Monsod.
Magandang gabi po.
Attorney, so mainit-init po itong issue no, ng attempts to launch a constitutional convention. But since most of our audience here now are young leaders, youth, and of course, our followers dito po sa ating live stream, can we start with the basics po? Can you tell us what is charter change and ano po yung mga available procedures, processes, at mga pamamaraan para amyendahan ng Constitution?
Well, yung Constitution po natin pwedeng mabago, amendment or revision ang tawag doon. There are three ways to do it. Yung una, yung tinatawag na People's Initiative na nanggagaling sa mga tao, yung proposal ng amendment ng Constitution. Percent of every congressional district, and the total in terms of the nation is about 10% of registered voters. So there have been several attempts at that. Yung tinatawag na People's Initiative, pwede lang yun amendment, hindi pwede magkaroon ng revision. Anong diferensya nun? For example, yung iibahin yung term limits ng mga congressman or senators, amendment lang yun. Pero yung babaguhin yung sistema from a presidential system to a federal, sinatawag din ng federal system, ay yung revision yun. Hindi pwedeng masakop yun ng tinatawag na People's Initiative. Ang ikalawang method of doing it is tinatawag na Constituent Assembly, na yung Senate and the House by themselves with 3/4 vote or 75% of the Senate, which is about 18 senators, or yung congressman, 75% of 314, I think, ang congressman natin ngayon. They can enact revisions or amendments. Pwede nilang ibahin. ang Constitution more than in a people's initiative. They can shape a system, parliamentary versus presidential, unitary versus federal. Pero ang kailangan, three-fourths vote of the Senate and the House voting separately, not voting jointly. Kasi nagkaroon ng issue dyan nung araw, but I think accepted na both by the Senate and the House na it should be a separate vote. The third method of amending the Constitution is by a constitutional convention. And the selection of the delegates is by election. As a matter of fact, there is an issue now kung pwedeng magdagdag ng delegates to a constitutional convention by appointment by the President. Now, hindi explicit yan sa Constitution kung limited to elected. But during the deliberations ng Constitutional Commission, maliwanag yan Representative Commissioner Maambong na yung bang delegates sa Constitutional Convention pwedeng appointed. And the answer of the chairman of the Committee on Amendments is that no, they should all be elected. So yun ang three ways to amend our Constitution. Ngayon, after magkaroon na siya nagkaroon sila ng Constituent Assembly or after the Constitutional Convention has come up with their proposals, yan po naman within 60 to 90 days natapos nila will be the subject yung plebiscite where the people can vote yes or no to the proposals. Pero wala nang diskusyon. Yes or no na lang. No? For example, they may have a completely new constitution. Yun, yes or no vote. It's called the plebiscite. And once the people approve it, then it comes into effect. Pag ang vote naman ng mga tao is a no vote, that's the end of it, of that proposal.
Thank you for that, Attorney Mansod. Now, I'll go straight to the recent happenings. No? Kagaya po ng nabanggit ko kanina, last month, the House of Representatives already approved on the third and final reading ito pong House Bill 7352, which aims to operationalize the Constitutional Convention that will introduce amendments to the 1987 Constitution. More information po, the measure garnered 301 affirmative votes and 7 negative votes. Ito pong bill na to now details the procedures changing the charter through a hybrid constitutional convention. And the Con-Con members will be made up of appointees and elected delegates from each district selected by the voting public through an election held simultaneously with the barangay and sangguniang kabataan elections. Attorney Mansod, yes po. Can you hear me?
Okay. Say it again, please, kasi nawala
sure
po.
Yes po, I was asking about ito pong recent na approval ng House of Representatives on the third and final reading of the Bill 7352. This bill now details the procedures for changing the charter through a hybrid constitutional convention. Ito po ay involved din that elected delegates from each district selected by the voting public through an election held simultaneously with the barangay and sa sangguniang kabataan elections in 2023. Now, gusto po naming malaman ano ang opinion ninyo on the effectiveness of such a mechanism.
Well, yung pinasanga ng House of Representatives, yung kanilang resolution, ngayon inaantay o dapat ngayon nasa kamay na ng Senado kung ipapasa din nila yon, yung ipopropose din nila yon ang Constitutional Convention. And up to now, the Senate has not acted on it. As a matter of fact, there are opinions voiced by the Senate President and certain senators na mahirap makuha yung boto. Kasi kailangan pag yung Constitutional Convention, two-thirds. There are 24 senators, so they need 16 votes in order to approve resolution to convene a constitutional convention. There has been no action yet on the part of the Senate. Yan ang inaantay natin. Kung yes or no sila, if they'll get the necessary 16 votes, 16 senators in order to convene a constitutional convention.
Thank you po, Attorney Mansod. Balikan ko po a little later yung tungkol po dyan sa naging response no, ng Senate so far or lack thereof. But ito pong positioning ng bill, no, given that the schedule provided in the particular bill coincides with the barangay and SK elections, which is this coming October, sa inyo po bang pananaw ay ample time pa rin ba or will there be enough time for our citizens to choose their delegates? Ano po magiging implications nito?
Hindi pwedeng ilagay yan hindi pwedeng magkaroon ng question sa barangay elections until it is approved by both the House and the Senate. Pero sinasabi ng COMELEC na may hihirapan sila because you need a separate ballot for that. And yung preparation, sabi nila, and the implementation of that proposal to put it to a vote, no, yung whether to convene yung constitutional convention is going to cost a lot of money. I think they mentioned 2 billion more, no, in order to have that to have that vote in the coming barangay elections. So
Attorney Mansod? Hello, Attorney Mansod, can you hear us? Alright, so babalikan po natin a little later si Attorney Monsod. So far, yung ating pong para po sa mga kaka-tune in lang dito sa ating episode ngayong gabi, tinatalakay po natin ang usaping Constitutional Convention. No? Sa nauna na pong talakayan, nililinaw ni Attorney Christian Monsod, isa sa mga framers ng 1987 Philippine Constitution, na kailangan pa rin no na sa pagkakapasa ng bill sa third and final reading sa House level ay kailangan pa rin na magkaroon ng tugon ang Senado para ito ay magtuloy-tuloy, ano po. So binabanggit din ni Attorney Monsod kanina no na hindi pa rin hindi pa rin natin matatakdaan no o mapo-finalize kung ano ang magiging itsura nung pagka-coincide nito sa barangay and SK elections, gayong wala pa ngang sapat na tugon no ang Senado ukol dito sa ipinasang resolution. Mamaya po isa-isa rin nating tatalakayin kasama si Attorney Christian Monsod ang iba pang mga detalye no kung ano nga ba ang basehan nitong bagong panukala para sa isang revision no ng ating konstitusyon, at pupuntahan din po natin ang mga proseso na nakapaloob sa isang constitutional convention. Ano nga ba ang mga asahan natin kung sakaling ito ay matuloy, at ano rin ang chances no na ito ay magpatuloy. Yan. Natili lamang po nakatutok dito sa ating episode ngayong gabi para po sa mga kakatutok lang, please do not forget to like and share our episode tonight and use the hashtag sa atin ang eleksyon. At syempre, kung meron po kayong questions and comments, pwede nyo pong gamitin ang ating Lente hotlines na finlash po namin kanina. And of course, feel free to post your comments, opinions, and reactions dito po sa ating comment section.
Can I just make one correction on
Yes,
the
sir.
issue of yung amendments to the Constitution by people's initiative?
Mhm.
Ang kailangan na boto is 3% from each district and 12% nationwide, not 10%. It's 12% nationwide.
12%.
Ang kailangan na may yung
Go ahead po, Attorney Mansur.
okay.
Yes.
Now I
Okay
can
po.
see you.
Alright, thank you. Sige po. Tuloy po tayo dun sa ating talakayan na Mansod. No? More on the process and composition, I would like to ask, would a hybrid con-con, where members composed of the elected delegates along with Malacanang and Congress-appointed experts, be more beneficial, especially with regards to solving concerns and problems than in holding a con-as?
Well, as I said, while it's not explicit in the Constitution, if you read the deliberations of the Constitutional Commission, the delegates to a constitutional convention must be elected. Yun ang interpretation of the committee chairman on amendments in the Constitutional Commission. So, yung sinasabi nilang hahaluan nila ng I think 50 appointees, I don't think it can be done under the present under the Constitution. Dapat elected lahat.
So, Attorney Mansod, what could be the implications kung hindi po elected lahat? Like, for this, in this case, hybrid con-con, and there are Congress-appointed experts.
Well, if it is, by the way, it's not Congress appointed. It's election by district.
Mhm.
Ang proposal nila. In other words, the people who are supposed to elect the delegates. Ang problema natin is the present districts today are in the full control of dynastic families. And the biggest coalition is the dynastic families of 4 presidents: Estrada, Arroyo, Duterte, and Marcos. So the likelihood is that the delegates to the Constitutional Convention will be controlled by the present Congress. That's why we're saying it's not a good time, because yung dynastic families have the roots of the power of the dynastic families have deepened since EDSA, and this is not the right time to write that there's independently a constitutional convention that can write a full constitution. It's not just amendments or revisions. A constitutional convention, as well as a constituent assembly, has full plenary powers to even write a new constitution. So, what kind of a constitution are we going to have that is controlled by the present Congress of dynastic families?
Thank you very much for that, Attorney Mansod. And I would like to focus more about what you said, that it's not a good time because just recently, one senator also insisted that charter change is unnecessary and it's just a mere distraction. The same senator stated that redirecting large amounts of our limited resources to charter change at this time will just do more damage. Can you expound more on that, Attorney
Yes.
Monsod, why you say na
Yes.
it's not?
Kasi I was reading the proposals coming from Congress, and generally it was about a constitutional convention where the amendments or revisions or a new constitution are left to the Constitutional Convention. At as a matter of fact, sabi nga ni Congressman Rufus Rodriguez, who is the chairman of the House Committee on Charter Change, na ang gusto lang inserting the phrase unless otherwise provided by law in the economic provisions. So, it's very hard to understand why you want a constitutional convention when all you want is the insertion of one phrase in, I think, 7 or 8 provisions of the Constitution that are so-called economic provisions. There's not even a percentage. It's just a power of Congress to state or to allow ownership it's about foreign ownership, and that renders the constitutional provision on those economic provisions meaningless because the power has already shifted from the Constitution to Congress. Now, what are the implications of that? The implication of that is that if they want to change the percentage, for example, for foreign companies to own land, na pwede silang 100% ownership ng lupain natin, mga lupa, ang kailangan nila lang would be the vote of ordinary law. What is that? That is 50% plus 1 of the total congressman and 50% plus 1 on the quorum. And I estimate that to be about 75 or 76 congressmen only can already change the percentage ownership of foreigners on land o yung natural resources o yung public utilities. So that doesn't make sense. So there must be a hidden agenda. And the hidden agenda, you can find out from the proposals. For example, among them is a proposal to increase the term of office of every elected official from the president to the barangay to 5 years with 1 re-election. Which means that if that new constitution is approved, President Marcos can run for another term of 5 years. I mean, he ends his first term 5 instead of 6 years because of the new constitution, but he also can run for re-election for another 5 years. That's total of 10 years. And all the congressmen will also have 10 years. Yun ang isa sa proposals doon sa House of Representatives. But most of them only talk about economic provisions. And 1 or 2 is for a total overhaul of the Constitution. So hindi natin alam what are the hidden motives or hidden agenda of our congressman. That's why if you look at our history, there have been 7 attempts to change the Constitution. 4 were dismissed by the Supreme Court. 2 were dismissed by the Supreme Court. And then the others were withdrawn for lack of public support. Because our people
Alright, balikan po ulit natin mamaya-maya lamang si Attorney Monsod, pero mahalaga po no yung naiwanang punto ni Attorney Monsod kanina no na sa mga nagdaang pagtatangka na amyendahan ng konstitusyon at baguhin ng ilang mga probisyon dito ay crucial no at mahalaga na ito ay nakaangkla doon sa interes ng publiko. At ayan, Attorney Monsod, you were saying about lack of public support for the previous.
As a matter of fact, one example is in 2018 na nagkaroon ng survey SWS, and na ano at saka para sa Asia na ano ang posisyon ng tao tungkol baguhin o revision or mending ang Philippine Constitution. And if I remember correctly, 67% of the people said no. And I can understand that. Kasi yung present constitution natin is really devoted to social justice, which is new in our constitution. And itong survey na ito took place at the time when President Duterte was enjoying a very high trust rating from the public. And yet the public said, we don't want charter change. So if you look back, in 2018, si President Duterte supported the draft of the Puno Committee of a new constitution. He endorsed it. Sabi niya, it's a constitution that should be approved or supported by Congress. And yet, in 2019, President Duterte withdrew his endorsement of the Puno Committee version. Why? Because two of his cabinet members, NEDA and Finance, said that it's dangerous because of, we don't know what can happen with the changing the constitution. Sabi nila dangerous yan kasi there are many what do you call it, many questions na merong hanging hindi natin alam. So we need Ronnie Duterte. Sabi niya bahala na yung future congresses sa pagbabago o pagpapalit ng constitution. So yun ang history niyan. Ngayon, si President Marcos during the campaign was asked the same question, are you going to push for charter change? Ang sagot ni President Marcos during that campaign, election campaign, was mukhang ayaw ng tao na baguhin ang constitution. Then he was interviewed again when he was already president, and he changed his position a bit. He said na it is not in my priority. It's not to my priority, which is a play of words, no? Because kung ako yung congressman who want to change the constitution, sasabihin ko President Marcos, hindi naman maaabala yung legislative agenda kasi ang gagawa ng constitution is a separate body called the Constitutional Convention. That's why, as of today, I think it's proper to ask President Marcos, are you in favor or against charter change? He should be asked that question.
Thank you, Attorney Mansod. That is, in fact, a question that we need to follow, no? At talagang antabayanan po natin kung lalabas din, no, mula sa opisina ni President Marcos Jr. or from the President himself. But for the discussion, Attorney Mansod, you have already made it clear that if the basis is just for the pushing forward of the economic growth of the Philippines, like what these lawmakers claim, no, na kailangan para doon sa amendment, but just if a constitutional convention is to be held, how do you think we can ensure that the elected delegates and the appointees will prioritize the public interest? Kanina po, you have already mentioned that there is a possibility that it will just be, dominated by the current Congress. And what do you say about this?
Well, our Congresses, and particularly now, that is controlled by four dynastic former president families, cannot be trusted with legislation. I'll give you example, simple example. They have not passed an anti-dynasty provision law for 36 years. So our Congress is about self-interest. That's why ayaw ng taong there will be a change in constitution. Kasi alam nila based on the previous proposals and the actions of Congress on with respect to legislation, na it's always self-interest. It gives more power to them, for example, extension of limits, and it also gives them more opportunities for corruption with transactional legislation. Ano yung transactional legislation? Yan, pareho nung mining. Dapat may reform sa mining. Si President Aquino issued Executive Order 75 na kailangan baguhin ang mining agreements na masyadong in favor of mining companies. So, nag-file ang Aquino administration ng mining reform bill sa Congress. It died in committee. It never reached plenary session. Tapos si Duterte sabi niya, no, I'm also against open pit mining reforms in Congress, in mining, on mining contracts, and he also filed a mining reform law. It died in Congress. Why? Because the mining companies have money. The poor don't have money for lobbying. Tama? At saka the Congress, they only want more power for themselves. Whereas the Constitution, under its social justice provisions, already empowers the people. Di ba? With agrarian reform, urban land reform, indigenous peoples, at saka yung fishermen, and education and health, at saka ang sinasabi doon na social justice is the heart of our Constitution. Kaya gusto ng mga tao yan. Kaya lang, hindi ini-implement. And there are people who are pushing for charter change na ang biniblame nila Constitution. For example, that Foundation for Economic Freedom, sabi nila it's been 36 years and there's still poverty and inequality in our country. Therefore, we should change the Constitution. What's the logic of that? Where did that logic come from? Right? As a matter of fact, the problem is we are not implementing the Constitution fully because of self-interest of politicians, because of self-interest of big business. That's ang tawag nga dyan is the iron law of oligarchy. It is the conspiracy of crooked politicians and greedy business. Yan ang iron law of oligarchy. That's what we are. That's what we have to change. And as I always say, that we start to change by the barangay elections. The barangay elections is the election that's closest to the people. The barangay has executive, legislative, judicial powers, right? Quasi legislative, judicial, and legislative powers, and it is the local government that interacts with the people at the ground, and those barangays should be controlled by the poor because they're the majority of the voters in almost all of these barangays. And that's how we start change. That the sovereign people at the ground, which are mainly the poor and the marginalized, should control the barangays. In the next elections, they should control the municipalities. In the next election, they should control the provinces and the cities. And after that, the president. In other words, the transformation should not start from the top to the bottom. The transformations from the bottom to the top. And then we will have a new generation of leaders who know how it is to be poor. Ayan lang, that's the only time na magkakaroon tayo ng tunay na pagbabago sa bansa natin. Kung ang control ng local government from the barangay to the municipality to the province and the city are in the hands ng control ng mga mahirap at yung marginalized, na ating mga kababayan. It's time for the people, sovereign people, to really control government.
Attorney Mansod, more on that part where you mentioned about the Constitution not yet being fully implemented because of the self-interest of the current politicians.
Yes.
And you also mentioned about earlier about yung paggamit din po no doon sa ganitong platform no while the current version of course states about economic growth, then you mentioned that there may be reasons also for uh, this platform to be used para naman sa extension of term limits, for instance. But what about a change of government? Do you think the con-con for the change of government will follow, especially that the BARM now has parliamentary system of government?
Well, you're talking about changing the system of government, no? Sabi, lagyan natin, gagawin nilang federal. You know, kung pag-aralan ninyo yung proposal na shift to a federal system, etong mababasa ninyo. Number one, there will be a transition period of about 10 years. Sabi nga ni former UP President Abueva, who is a proponent of charter change, yung transition na yan is a long transition. Why? Because the provinces do not have now the capability uh, to be more autonomous. So it needs time. And there are only 3 provinces, 3 regions now who can be, maybe we can say, pwede ng ano yan, autonomous. What about the other 15? Ang bibigay nila, if you read the Puno committee proposal, is that during the transition period, at the time anyway that they were thinking of it, President Duterte can be a transition president, although he cannot run anymore under the new constitution. But he's a transition president to finish his term at the time kasi papasok 2019 at the time. But in any case, the point is that there will be an authoritarian government during the transition. They decide the transition, when the transition will take place. They will decide what kind of policies can be done at the local level and so on. Do the people know that yung mag-shift ng federal, it will take a transition of 10 years? Now, secondly, all the political science studies, you can ask the UP political science departments, say that when you shift to another system, like for example federal, the ones in control of that area today will be more in control of the area. Why? Let's take a look at, say, Region 6 or whatever provinces. The big boss will be the regional governor. So many of the powers of the president will now be in the hands of the governor. So when you have a federal system, you will have 18 super governors. And with the authoritarian constitution, you will have dictators, which happens. So, mali yung shift na yun. In fact, even the proponents of federalism say that the shift to federalism is indirect to sovereign power. Kasi nga, imagine they'll have a new level of government at the regional level. A new level of government. Ang estimate ng cost niya range from 80 billion to 130 billion. No? Ang laking pera yan. Kasi bagong bureaucracy at region. Moreover, sinasabi nila na the principle of subsidiarity, like solidarity, principle of solidarity, subsidiarity, and the church people know that, is putting power as low as possible to the people, subsidiarity, right? But yung gagawin nila, there is a new level of government at the regional level, which is farthest from the people. Ang malapit sa people yung barangay, tapos yung municipal, tapos yung mayor, tapos yung probinsya. Yung regional, napakalayo na sa tao. What kind of subsidiarity is that? Kalokohan yun na magki-create ka ng bagong level of very powerful people who are farther away from the people. Hindi ba? Where is the principle of subsidiarity? And yet, when you shift to a federal system, they will have a lot of power at the regional level. So, ang sabi nga ng mga experts on political science, there is no literature in political science that says that unitary or federal is better than the other. Although there are more unitary governments, about 160, and I think 30 only of the federal. But the point is that sinasabi nila na yung mangyayari is that yung changes uh, are irreversible na, right? In fact, the Puno committee said that once we shift to federal, it cannot be changed forever. Yun ang nakalagay sa kanilang mga draft constitution. Sinasabi ng political science, since there is no study that says one is better than the other, whatever you have, just make it work with amendments, with fine-tuning, and so on. But don't change the system because you may make a bigger mistake when you do that and endanger, in fact, the democracy when you have 18 dictators in the country with the regions, di ba? So, hindi na napag-isapan. Sabi nila, as a matter of fact, when you change or amend the Constitution, stick only to the manifest errors. Yung manifest errors. So the question is, are there any manifest errors in the present Constitution? I have not heard any that is about manifest error. If not, it's better to just fine-tune and amend and so on. We can have amendments. For example, at the right time, I don't mind if there is an amendment na yung vote for president and vice president is a tandem vote so that you don't have president and vice president from different parties. But that's a minor change in the constitution that can be you can say, well, baka pwede yun, no? But when you say, well, economic provisions lang ang babaguhin namin with insertion of one phrase, unless otherwise provided by law, you're lying. Why are you going to have a constitutional convention with that kind of amendment and wala na? Merong other agenda yan. And we should watch out for that. Ang aking paalala sa ating mga kababayan, huwag kayong magpaloko. Pag nagkaroon ng bagong mga amendment revision or bagong constitution, you can bet na mahina they will one of the big things should be social justice. And you can bet that it will be replaced by the objectives of business. At saka mahihirapan din yung indigenous peoples. Ngayon, ang constitution natin favors the indigenous peoples and in fact says that the customary laws should be taken into consideration to protect our indigenous peoples. Bakit? Bakit ang indigenous peoples natin used to own all the land in this country? And then the colonials came, the Spanish and the US, and they what they did was they allied with the landowners and the elite. Di ba ganun nangyayari sa ating history? No? So nakalimutan nung pumasok yung mga sa areas, yung mga landowners and the US, whatever it is, napaalis yung indigenous people from the best agricultural land. They were put into higher ground. No, they were pushed to higher ground. And then mining came. And mining went to the hiring ground. And they have both forestry and water rights. Can you imagine? The miners have that. So ano natira sa indigenous peoples natin? Nawala sila ng lupa. nilagay sila dun sa mataas na lupa, pinasok ang mining. Ano nangyari sa kanila? And ating constitution protects them and supports them, but that is not being implemented because of the iron law of oligarchy.
Naman, so if the constitutional change is not the way to go, what do you say should the government focus on instead, in order to
But
actually fully implement, the constitution with social justice at its heart?
yes, well, actually, when we talk social justice, if you look at the constitution, it also promotes uh, uh, yung governance to strengthen and give more power to local government. Di ba? Yun ang other of the constitution, social justice, local autonomy. And there already have been studies, and there was an assessment in 2014 and 2015, including the UP PIDS, research group. Nag-assessment sila on the effect of the local government code and what are needed in order to fully implement the intent of the constitution for local autonomy. And there is a paper of 30 amendments to the local government code in order to give more power and resources to local government. Is the Congress attending to that? I sent copies to some members of Congress. No, they're not. They're saying, no, we want a charter change. Why don't you try improving the local government code with these amendments proposed by the Philippine committees, PIDS, and assessment in 2014, 2015, nationwide. They conducted an assessment nationwide, and these are their findings. Why don't they pass those amendments to local government code? And they're thinking, hindi, kailangan baguhin ng konstitusyon. Excuse me? Nasa harap na ninyo yung proposals na how to improve the local government code. Why don't you read it? Why don't you pass those laws?
Attorney Mansod. And at this point, we're down to our last question, I think. What is your message for the public? I mean, you mentioned about that every attempt to reform or change the constitution should be centered on the interests of the public and should always have the public support. So ano po ang magagawa ng publiko sa mga ganitong pagkakataon na sinusubukang baguhin ang constitution, which you said is very prone and vulnerable to the just exhaustion of our means para doon sa mga self-interest ng current politicians. Attorney Mansod.
Okay, well, ito sa aking pakiusap sa ating mga makababayan. It is time for the sovereign people to speak out and take power. Kami mga intermediary yan. Mga NGOs, we're intermediaries. Our job is to empower the people. Once we have empowered the poor, then we withdraw. We have done our mission. We have been successful in our mission. And so, this is what I also told the church. There are only 3 institutions in our country with a nationwide reach. What are these? Local government, the military and the police, and the church. So we need the church in order for us to identify, support, and nurture good young people among the poor, starting with the barangay. Yan sa akin sa simbahan, kaya usap ko yung mga bishops, nagkaroon kami ng meeting, sabi ko, tumulong naman kayo to identify, nurture, and support the poor to take over the barangays. So that, kasi ngayon yung mga political dynasties, kung araw hanggang mayorship lang sila. Ngayon, bumaba na sila sa barangay. Hindi tama yun. The barangay should be controlled by the poor or the majority there. Magkaroon tayo ng tunay na mga leaders from the poor. So let's start in October. Yan ang sinasabi ko. Umpisahan natin. Ipakita natin na it's time for the people to speak and to take power. And tulungan natin sila. Kasi yan ang kanilang karapatan. Yan ang intensyon ng ating Constitution, autonomy, social justice. Umpisahan natin dyan. And then the next election, di ba? Sabi ko, municipal, the next election province, until we have a new generation of leaders. Yan ang tunay na pagbabago na mangyayari sa bayan natin. Please, let's start with the barangay elections.
On that note, thank you very much, Attorney Christian Monsod, one of the framers of our 1987 Philippine Constitution. Salamat po sa mga punto at sa pagpapaliwanag at sa oras din po na binigay ninyo sa amin sa episode na ito. At muli, yan po si Attorney Christian Monsod at ito po ang ating episode tungkol sa Constitutional Convention, sa charter change at iba pang mga issues on processes na ating tinalakay kanina dito po sa ating episode. Maraming salamat din po sa ating mga taga-subaybay at sa ating mga viewers sa patuloy na pagtangkilik ng ang show na Walang Title. Mga ka-LENTE, maaaring mapakinggan ang episode na ito pati na rin ang mga past episodes ng ang show na Walang Title sa aming Spotify page. Sa mga napapanahong balita tungkol sa eleksyon at isyong panlipunan, tumutok lamang din po sa Oras na Pilipinas, dapat pwede. That's every first and last Friday of the month, 8 to 8:30 a.m. Mapapanood at mapapakinggan po ninyo ito sa 702 DZAS FEBC Radio TV at sa terrestrial radio through 702 DZAS AM. At abangan rin ang mga susunod pang episode ng ang show na Walang Title. Tutok lamang po sa LENTE social media pages para sa mga ito. At para manatiling updated sa usapang eleksyon at iba pa, huwag kalimutang i-like ang aming Facebook page, LENTE Philippines, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok accounts at lente_ph at i-visit ang aming website, lente.org.ph. At shout out din po, syempre, sa LENTE Secretariat na bumubuo po ng ating at nasa likod ng ang show na Walang Title. Hello, at magandang gabi sa inyo. At see you again sa susunod na episode, mga ka-LENTE. Ako po muli si Paul Soriano. Magandang gabi at happy weekend.